Welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. You guys can interact with me or follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast on Instagram. Now, if you're getting a lot from this show, if it's changing your life or even changing the way that you look at your life, it would mean the world to me if you would head to iTunes and give us a 5-star review so that we can continue to climb the charts and get this information to more and more people. Over the last year and a half, I've focused my work on the story that we tell ourselves about our lives. Your entire life is a bit of a story that you're telling yourself. And if you could tell yourself a different story, you could probably change your life quite a bit. And so I did that work for the release of my newest book, which is coming out in early 2020. But getting excited for that release, I actually wanted to go through a lot of the information that I had learned, a lot of my notes, and synthesize it into maxims, which is what we're getting into today. I've got 21 maxims to maximize your life, and what these are is just things that seem to be true about the human experience, and if you could understand how they are true, you could understand how they could change your life. And so if you go to rickalexander.com, what you're going to find is if you click on articles, the maxim of the day is going to be posted, whatever the last maxim was, and it's also going to have journal entries and thought experiments in there so that you can figure out how to apply these things to your own lives. And so a bit of an interactive experience. So throughout the next year, through my speaking, through my book release, and through these maxims, I'm excited to see how this information can really change the world and change your world if you give it an opportunity to. In the late 19th century, there was a Japanese Zen master, and his name was Nan-in. And a university professor came to inquire about Zen. Nan-in served him tea. He poured his visitor's cup until it was full, and then he just kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. "It's over full," he said. "No more is going to go in." "Like this cup," Nan-in said, "you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" And I wanted to kick off with that, what's called a koan from Zen Buddhism. And Zen originated in China, and it's interesting in its religious practice in that it de-emphasizes knowledge of doctrine and emphasizes direct understanding of truth, which is, I think, one of the things that makes me draws me to all of these what are called koans, which are basically like parables that are meant to help you understand the true nature of reality, which in many cases makes us relinquish what we previously knew. And because life is fluid and not static, it requires our beliefs to mold and evolve as we do in many cases. And so the point of the koan, which is Koan, is to exhaust the analytical and egoic mind in order to reveal the more intuitive no mind. So they're not really about arriving at an answer, but to see for ourselves that our intellections can never provide us with a completely satisfying answer. They're not about arriving at some answer, but to see for ourselves that, first of all, our intellections can never provide us with a completely satisfying answer. But typically they reveal some sort of deep truth in the untangling of the mystery. This is why the Zen Buddhism often speaks in riddles. As people become attached to our own beliefs, if we aren't careful, we become an arbiter or puppet of our beliefs, and then they're no longer serving us. Actually, it becomes the other way around. And so you can tell if people have a lot of beliefs about the world that they haven't actually questioned, then those ideas and those beliefs actually have them. They don't have the ability to say what they mean and then sort of pivot from them and see where it might not be true and see where it might not be serving them and see where it, it's like there's an appropriate amount of questioning to the things that you believe. And the reason is because life isn't this static utopia. It's not this static thing where you can decide this is how success works, this is what's true, and then I'm going to continue to move. Because as you move through life, other things reveal themselves, and as things reveal themselves to you, other things become true. You have to widen your perspective for what truth actually is so that it can hold more things. And if you decide not to do that, then you live in opposition instead of paradox, because you open your perspective to what's true about life. That opens you to this idea that everything exists in sort of a paradox. And if you want to keep your simple understanding of life, then then what you do is you close off your perspective, and then what is paradox becomes opposition, and you think things are either or, and that you're actually against things. And that might be helpful to a certain degree, but it might not get you ultimately where you want to go, right? It might get you a lot of, let's say, egoic success, but then you might realize, wow, I've got a garage full of shit and I don't actually know what I want to do with my life next, or I don't know what it means, or I don't know why I don't care about all of the things that I've attained. And so because as we live more, what is true to us evolves. It becomes different. What we used to think the point of life is no longer is anymore, right? A lot of times we go after what the ego wants for a certain amount of time, and then we run into a point where it no longer satisfies, right? Because what's true is not true anymore. The truth has to get wider. This is why the only true expectation you can have is that what you know is incorrect. That's the gift that science continues to give us. If it weren't that way, we'd probably be pretty bored quickly, but it's this idea that as we learn more, we actually are just learning more about what we don't know, which is why if you follow somebody in the personal development space and they tend to dig their heels in, I would say to be very cautious of that person, right? If they defend what they believe and they've only defended that belief system for years on end and it's not evolved in some way, then it could be that they actually have a vested interest in that belief system being true and not in the actual reality of the world, right? It could be that they're just clinging on to something that is no longer true. And because life is so fluid and so evolving, I would say that the more dogmatic you become, the more clinged on to something you become that you believe. Again, the further from truth you'll actually get over a period of time. The strength in this message actually comes from simply relinquishing your grip on life. The nature of it can't be grasped, and when we try to, we're no longer talking about life but an idea. So it's kind of somewhat like the idea of God itself, since we talked a little bit about religion in this podcast. One of the best definitions I've ever heard of God is that it exists outside of everything that you understand. And so if you're talking about God directly, you actually aren't. You couldn't be because you don't understand it. So you're talking about an idea of God. And so in light of this, the goal is always to hold on loosely. Like you can pursue things, but you have to hold space for what else might be true. You know, the inability to do this is why we have people that are stuck in their beliefs and unable to pivot even though their life isn't serving them. So maybe they're like chained to a marriage or they're chained to a career because they made certain decisions early on in life and they had a certain belief system that what actually mattered in life was, let's say, the amount of money that they could make or the benefits or the safety that they could derive from it. And then they get into that career. You get 10 years down the road and you realize you're completely unhappy because maybe, again, you're the guy or girl that's looking around in the garage and you're like, what is all this shit for? Why do I need all of this? I don't think that I do. And so as that happens, if you haven't questioned your belief, if you're not in the practice of questioning your belief, then your beliefs have you and you don't have the ability to pivot because you're like, but this is what success is and this is what people are saying. And so if you can open yourself up to a new perspective that something else might also be true, that there are more perspectives that will encompass more truth as you evolve and as you continue, then you give yourself the liberation and the freedom of pivoting within your path, of going down wherever your soul feels called to and not getting stuck in some stagnant reality that doesn't represent actual truth to you. This is, again, the problem with, this is one of my earliest critiques on politics, was the idea that we tend to vilify flip-floppers. And it's like ridiculous that you would learn about the world, that you would go all around the world, you'd meet world leaders, and that your opinion wouldn't change over time. It would be ridiculous, actually. No, I guess it would be politics. But we push on in the direction of our dreams, for example, all while knowing that we have to leave room to pivot if our souls call us elsewhere. This is also why you have the saying, be hard on principles and soft on methods, because you want to make sure that you leave room for what you don't understand. It might be that there's a better method to get to the end state that you're looking for. But how many people hold on to their beliefs without being served by them? Is there anyone you know stuck in a job they don't think they can leave? What about a relationship? Look, life isn't somewhere to get, it's something to experience. And so when we treat it like it's somewhere to arrive, we end up clinging far too tightly to things that aren't serving us or what we want for ourselves. Like we cling to things that serve us in the past, that used to serve us, right? But maybe they're not anymore. Again, that's because there isn't somewhere to get. And so when we relinquish this idea that there's somewhere to get, and we relinquish our grasp on everything that we've worked for to be true or to organize in our mind, when we just allow like create space for yourself in your mind. Face the fact that the rug could get pulled out from under you, but that doesn't destabilize you in some way, right? Like your beliefs can change because you're in a complex world that you don't understand at all, right? And you have a very finite awareness in which to navigate this thing, which is actually one of the maxims we'll talk about later. But have some compassion for yourself and understanding that you don't understand, and that as you go down the path, you get a new perspective, more things become true to you, and you have to allow yourself to do the human thing and evolve and take on the lessons that life is actually trying to teach you, instead of shutting yourself off to what it's trying to teach you and just clinging to what you've already known. That leaves us in a place with much to be desired. It leaves us in a place with little liberation and where we can't actually pivot from. And so always assume that the rug you're standing on will be gone soon. And I would say, if we could just focus back at the beginning of this episode when we talked about that Zen Buddhist cone, like this cup, Nanan said, you're full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? And so if you're getting to a point in your life where you're like looking to learn something new, or you're feeling like there's an answer out there, or there's something out there that's like, man, I feel like there's more to life and I'm not sure necessarily where to look, understand that you might not even be able to hold what's more because you're so full of what you've already done. Allow these things in life to pass through you so that they don't control you in some way, and that you're actually free to use things as they serve you, to discard things as they don't serve you, and to continue on in a somewhat linear fashion. Now in life is never linear, right? We get pulled into polarities, we get pulled into cycles of thought, and we spiral into negative thought loops sometimes. And sometimes we go off on tangents and we date somebody that's not good for us at all, and we'll spend a whole year or two going down that path. Well, that path probably had something for you, but maybe you're at a point now where you just got to release your grip on it a little bit. Allow other things to be true so that you can be sure that your ideas don't have you and that they're actually still serving you. It's a far more beneficial way to go through life, in my opinion. And I think the reason that's true is because, again, as we learn more, we actually learn more about what we don't know. And so we have to come up with a disposition toward life that allows us to hold space for all that we don't know while still continuing to move forward. I love you. Hope you have an amazing day. We'll talk later on Morning Coffee.